For 2 years, Makoto Asuka chased a dream that everyone else had already given up on. Even though he had received a sacred stone like every other hunter, not a single divine spirit ever answered his call. Branded as the weakest hunter alive, Makoto became nothing more than a servant, carrying equipment while everyone else fought. But despite all the ridicule, he never stopped training. Every single day, he practiced thousands of sword swings and pushed his body to its limits, believing that one day a divine spirit would finally acknowledge him. His determination came from a painful promise. Years earlier, a massive demon invasion had taken his parents' lives, and Makoto swore he would become strong enough to protect others from suffering the same fate. Unfortunately, the world had no place for hunters without divine spirits. His teammates mocked him, strangers laughed at his efforts, and even fellow hunters claimed he was worse than an ordinary civilian because he couldn't form a pact. Still, Makoto refused to give up. One day, his team entered an E-rank dungeon outside Tokyo. While the other hunters effortlessly defeated demons, using the powers granted by their divine spirits, Makoto could only support them from the sidelines. When a surviving demon suddenly attacked him, Makoto tried proving his worth by fighting back. His sword landed perfectly, but it couldn't even scratch the monster. Without a divine spirit, his strength meant nothing. Hino saved him at the last second, and even praised his determination, giving Makoto a small glimmer of hope that maybe his hard work wasn't meaningless after all. But that hope didn't last long. After reaching the dungeon's boss room, his own teammates suddenly turned on him. Without warning, they restrained Makoto, threw him inside the chamber, and locked the massive gate behind him. Only then did Hino reveal the truth. Makoto had never been their teammate. He was simply bait. Believing someone without a divine spirit had no value, they abandoned him to be eaten by the dungeon boss. Standing before him was a gigantic behemoth. Makoto desperately searched for a way to escape, but the collapsing cave sealed every possible exit. As the behemoth charged toward him, death became unavoidable. At that moment, countless regrets flooded his mind. He had failed to avenge his parents. He had failed to become a real hunter. And now, he was going to die without accomplishing anything. Suddenly, the sacred stone that had remained silent for 2 years began glowing with an ominous black light. Dark shadows erupted from the stone, surrounding Makoto with an overwhelming power that even the behemoth instinctively feared. The next instant, everything around him disappeared. Makoto found himself standing inside a mysterious world covered in endless darkness. As black feathers slowly drifted through the air, a breathtaking woman with enormous black wings descended before him. Holding out her hand, she smiled. For the first time in 2 years, a divine spirit had finally answered Makoto's call. Except, she was nothing like the others. Makoto stared at the winged woman, unable to understand what was happening. She urged him to make his decision quickly, explaining that the strange space surrounding them would not remain stable for much longer. Standing before him, she asked him to choose whether he wished to form a pact. Makoto wondered if she was finally the divine spirit he had waited for all these years. Believing that she was, he accepted without hesitation, determined to fight alongside her. As their hands met, the pact was completed. A surge of dark energy flowed from her into his sacred stone, and an unfamiliar sensation spread throughout his body. He realized this was what it truly felt like to forge a spiritual pact. The mysterious realm disappeared, returning Makoto to the battlefield where the behemoth still stood before him. Tightening his grip on his sword, he prepared himself for battle. The monster released a deafening roar that shook both the ground and Makoto's resolve, its overwhelming presence seeming even greater than before. As the behemoth rushed toward him, Makoto reminded himself that everything had changed. He was no longer the powerless hunter he had been only moments earlier. When the behemoth attacked, Makoto pushed off the ground to evade it, and was astonished by the distance he covered with such little effort. The incredible leap immediately revealed the immense physical enhancement granted by his newly formed pact. Filled with excitement, he prepared to launch his first counterattack before suddenly realizing he had no idea what abilities his new partner had actually given him. The realization filled him with panic. Before he could react, the behemoth appeared behind him and launched another attack. Makoto narrowly escaped and mentally called out to the mysterious woman, asking what powers she possessed. To his surprise, her voice echoed directly inside his mind. She casually admitted that she had forgotten to explain her abilities. Frustrated by her timing, Makoto protested, while she pointed out that he had never asked. With no time left for arguments, both quickly focused on the battle. The behemoth's massive claws crashed into the ground, shattering the earth, but Makoto escaped at the last instant. Remembering the dark energy that had surrounded him earlier, he asked if that mysterious force was the source of her power. She confirmed it and introduced the ability known as Rebellion Shadow. Through this power, Makoto could freely manipulate shadows. She explained that by concentrating, he would naturally understand how to use the ability. Closing his eyes for only a brief moment, Makoto focused on the darkness flowing from his sacred stone. Shadows gathered in his hand before taking the form of a long black sword. Amazed by the transformation, he learned that this was a shadow weapon, capable of being created from darkness itself. At his current level, he could shape shadows into weapons of his choosing. Smiling with renewed confidence, Makoto concluded that this power alone was more than enough to challenge the behemoth. Turning his attention back to the monster, he confidently prepared for another clash. The enraged behemoth lashed out with its enormous tail, smashing the ground as it attacked. Makoto responded instantly, swinging his shadow blade in one swift motion. The strike cleanly severed the behemoth's tail, sending the massive limb crashing onto the ground while the creature roared in agony. The wounded behemoth glared at Makoto with burning rage, but its expression quickly changed. Behind Makoto, a terrifying shadowy figure with enormous eyes briefly manifested, causing even the powerful monster to hesitate in fear. Taking advantage of the opening, Makoto rushed forward and aimed a decisive strike at the behemoth's head. The monster narrowly avoided the attack by pulling its head backward, revealing that it had already begun adapting to Makoto's attack range. Recognizing this, Makoto immediately altered his strategy. He leaped high into the air while the behemoth retreated to create distance. In midair, he reshaped his shadow weapon, extending its length far beyond that of an ordinary sword. With its newly increased reach, he sliced through the behemoth's limbs from a safe distance. The monster collapsed with another roar of pain, confirming Makoto's suspicion that his shadow weapon could freely change its shape during battle. Standing over the injured behemoth, Makoto reflected on every insult he had endured throughout the past 2 years. He remembered being called a fraud, a burden, a waste of a sacred stone, and someone who would never be acknowledged by a divine spirit. Those painful memories only strengthened his determination. Reshaping his weapon one final time, he transformed it into a gigantic butcher's knife. Every moment of relentless training suddenly felt worthwhile. With complete confidence, Makoto delivered a single, overwhelming strike. The massive shadow blade cut straight through the behemoth, splitting its enormous body into two. The defeated monster collapsed to the ground as silence filled the dungeon. Staring at the fallen beast, Makoto could barely believe the victory he had achieved. His shadow weapon dissolved, and with trembling hands, he quietly celebrated defeating a demon through his own strength for the very first time. Completely drained after the battle, Makoto sat on the ground and looked at the sacred stone, wondering if he could finally speak with the mysterious woman face to face. He asked her to appear. In response, shadows emerged from the stone, taking her form once again. Makoto sincerely thanked her, believing she had saved his life. She calmly replied that she had only provided the power, while he alone had fought and earned the victory. Still overwhelmed with gratitude, Makoto thanked her once again for agreeing to form a pact with him. As they continued talking, Makoto praised the incredible ability to manipulate shadows. He assumed such overwhelming strength could only belong to a high-ranking divine spirit, especially after witnessing her power defeat an E-rank dungeon boss so effortlessly. The woman remained silent for a moment before revealing the truth. She explained that she was not a divine spirit at all. Instead, she was a demon. The revelation left Makoto frozen in disbelief, as confusion and shock overwhelmed everything he thought he understood about his newfound power. For years, demons had slaughtered countless divine spirits and nearly driven humanity to extinction. In response, humans had formed pacts with the surviving divine spirits to become hunters capable of resisting the invasion. Unable to reconcile those facts with his current situation, Makoto questioned how someone who claimed to be a demon could have formed a pact with him instead of a divine spirit. Sensing both his confusion and growing concern, the mysterious woman tightened her arms and prepared to explain. Before she could reveal anything further, the heavy door to the boss chamber slowly opened. Voices echoed into the room as Makoto's former teammates casually entered. Fully convinced that the behemoth had already devoured him, they confidently assumed he was long dead. But the moment they saw him standing unharmed, every one of them froze in disbelief. Makoto immediately confronted them, demanding an explanation for their betrayal. While Kamio struggled to understand how he had survived, Mito looked around in confusion, wondering what had happened to the dungeon boss. Hino quickly pieced everything together and realized that Makoto must have finally formed a pact. That realization instantly turned into panic. Hino understood that if Makoto exposed their attempted murder, their futures as hunters would be destroyed. Without hesitation, the three hunters activated their divine spirit abilities and decided that eliminating Makoto was their only remaining option. Rather than focusing on them, Makoto asked the mysterious woman for her name. Slightly surprised, she introduced herself as Renoa. Deciding that further questions could wait, Makoto asked for her strength once again. Renoa accepted without hesitation, allowing shadows to gather around him and reshape into a dark sword. Hino mocked Makoto, dismissing him as the same powerless weakling he had always been, and encouraged the others to finish him quickly. Before anyone could attack, Hino's own divine spirit interrupted him with an unexpected warning. The spirit questioned whether confronting Makoto was truly wise. Confused, Hino asked if his companion was actually afraid. Instead of answering directly, the spirit criticized him for failing to recognize the abnormal presence surrounding Makoto. The divine spirits accompanying Mido and Kamio reacted the same way. None of them had ever encountered power like Renoa's before. They immediately recognized that Makoto's pact existed on an entirely different level from ordinary divine spirits. Alarmed, Hino demanded to know what kind of spirit Makoto had partnered with. Although even the divine spirits could not identify Renoa, they sensed that her strength rivaled that of a top-class divine spirit. Everyone was stunned by the revelation. Divine spirits were divided into several ranks: lower, middle, upper, and top class, with only an extremely small number ever reaching the highest level. Those elite spirits possessed overwhelming power, far beyond that of ordinary hunters. Hearing this only deepened Makoto's curiosity about Renoa's true identity, but she signaled that there was no time for explanations. The battle was about to begin. Refusing to accept reality, Hino convinced himself that Makoto's newly formed pact was still undeveloped. Since Makoto had only just defeated his first major opponent, Hino believed he could still overwhelm him through experience. Mido hesitated, acknowledging that hunters certainly became stronger after defeating demons, but she could not ignore the possibility that Makoto's newfound power had already surpassed theirs. Kamio openly admitted that if Makoto had truly partnered with a top-class spirit, none of them stood any chance. Furious at their hesitation, Hino branded them cowards before charging toward Makoto himself. Surrounded by blazing flames, Hino launched a powerful punch directly at Makoto. Rather than meeting the attack head-on, Makoto calmly stepped aside at the last possible moment. Hino followed with a relentless barrage of flaming strikes, yet Makoto avoided every single one effortlessly, reading each movement before it happened. When Hino unleashed an enhanced attack fueled by his spirit's flames, Makoto responded with a single swing of his shadow blade, slicing cleanly through the fire itself. The effortless counter left the three hunters speechless. Makoto questioned whether Hino had been holding back, further fueling his opponent's anger. Hino insisted that Makoto's success was nothing more than luck gained through partnering with an unusually powerful spirit. Makoto firmly rejected that accusation. He reminded himself that his strength had not appeared overnight. Unlike those who mocked him, he had spent years training without giving up despite endless rejection and humiliation. Driven into a rage, Hino unleashed his strongest secret technique, surrounding the battlefield with an enormous wave of flames. He ordered Mido and Kamio to fight beside him, warning that if they failed to eliminate Makoto now, they would be the ones facing ruin. Reluctantly, both hunters activated their own ultimate abilities. Fire, water, and lightning converged into a devastating combined assault that detonated with overwhelming force, tearing apart the battlefield and filling the area with smoke and shattered debris. As silence followed the explosion, the three hunters believed victory was certain. However, once the dust settled, Makoto remained exactly where he had stood. Not a single injury marked his body. Calmly, he explained that he had simply cut through every attack they launched. Compared to the behemoth he had just defeated, their combined assault had been far slower and far easier to handle. Taking a step forward, Makoto closed the distance between them and silently challenged them to continue. For the first time, genuine fear appeared on Hino's face. Behind Makoto, Renoa's overwhelming presence seemed to loom like a silent warning. Desperate to regain control, Hino gathered another wave of flames and continued hurling insults while launching fireballs at Makoto. Makoto lowered his stance and effortlessly avoided every projectile as he advanced. The moment he reached Hino, Makoto abandoned his shadow weapon entirely. Instead of cutting his former teammate down, he drove a single powerful punch straight into Hino's stomach. The impact sent Hino flying across the battlefield before crashing heavily to the ground, coughing blood from the force of the blow. Standing over the defeated hunter, Makoto calmly declared that he truly was a hunter. Hino collapsed near his companions, completely unable to continue fighting. Makoto then ordered Mido and Kamio to take Hino and leave immediately. He warned them never to speak about what had happened inside the dungeon. Terrified by the overwhelming difference in strength, the two hunters quickly carried Hino away without offering any resistance. After they disappeared, Makoto's sacred stone glowed once again, and Rinoa emerged from the swirling shadows. With a faint smile, she remarked that she had expected him to rely on his sword rather than defeat Hino with a punch. Makoto replied that killing him had never been necessary. He thanked Rinoa for standing beside him throughout the battle, and reminded her that their earlier conversations still remained unfinished. Understanding that he deserved answers, Rinoa's expression became serious. Clenching her hands, she prepared herself to reveal the truth about why she was not a divine spirit, but a demon. Fiona revealed that she had once belonged to the angel race as a divine spirit. However, after an incident in the distant past, she had fallen from grace and become a demon. Makoto listened in stunned silence, carefully considering everything she said. He knew divine spirits and angels were among the highest-ranking beings in existence, yet he had never imagined that one could fall and transform into a demon. She continued by explaining that her former identity as a divine spirit was the reason she was still capable of forming a pact with a human. Even so, neither of them understood how her sacred stone had found its way into Makoto's possession. The entire situation defied normal rules, making it impossible for her to explain. Makoto acknowledged her explanation, showing that he understood her circumstances. Riona then admitted that no matter how much she tried to hide her past, she could never erase the truth that she was now a demon. Believing he might feel uncomfortable with that fact, she offered to end their pact immediately if he wished. Although she tried to remain calm, the slight trembling in her arm betrayed her anxiety. After quietly watching her, Makoto let out a small sigh and sat beside her. He formally introduced himself as Makoto Asuka, an 18-year-old hunter. Riona was puzzled by the sudden introduction, but Makoto explained that he had already decided she was not an evil person. Because of that, he had no intention of breaking their agreement. Introducing himself properly was simply his way of expressing that he intended to rely on her from that point onward. His words left Riona speechless for a moment, before a gentle smile appeared on her face. She remarked that he was certainly an unusual person, but since he had accepted her, she was willing to stand by him as well. With the matter settled, Makoto suggested they leave the dungeon together. Far away in the demon realm, two demons silently observed the pair. One commented that the fallen angel had betrayed their side exactly as expected. The other dismissed the matter entirely, insisting that her actions would have no effect on their larger plans. Finding the situation amusing, the first demon simply looked forward to seeing how everything would unfold. Later, Makoto returned to his apartment in Tokyo and unlocked the door to room 3003. After switching on the lights, he showed Riona the modest living space, which contained little more than a bed, a table, and a few storage boxes. He invited her to make herself comfortable. Looking around the room, Riona found it difficult to believe humans actually lived in places like this. To her, it resembled the caves found in the demon realm, serving only as shelter from the weather. Makoto explained that it was merely a place to sleep before asking whether there was anything she particularly liked. She hesitated at first, unsure what he meant, until he clarified that it could be absolutely anything. After thinking for a moment, she admitted that she loved beautiful scenery. Seeing her attention drift toward the window, Makoto suggested decorating the room with flowers to make the view feel brighter. Riona warmly approved of the idea, and Makoto proposed that they buy a new flower every time they successfully cleared a dungeon. The thought brought a genuine smile to her face. Exhausted by everything that had happened, Makoto decided to turn in early. As he prepared for bed, Riona approached and examined it before commenting that it seemed rather small for two people. Makoto immediately became flustered at the implication. Riona, however, simply believed sharing a bed was normal, as that had been customary in the angelic realm. Curious, Makoto asked whether divine spirits even needed sleep while outside their sacred stones. Riona admitted she was uncertain, so Makoto suggested she rest within the sacred stone instead. She agreed without objection, quietly returning to it before wishing him a peaceful night. After tidying his room, Makoto lay down on his bed and stared thoughtfully at the sacred stone. He realized that if anyone discovered he had formed a pact with a demon, the consequences could be severe. Determined to avoid unnecessary attention, he decided to continue working alone. For the time being, he planned to challenge only F-rank dungeons, the only difficulty he could confidently clear by himself. The following day, Makoto arrived at the headquarters of the Japanese Hunter Association, with Riona's sacred stone concealed inside his glove. He quietly checked whether she felt any discomfort, and she assured him everything was fine. She also agreed that hiding the unusual purple stone was the safest decision, as it would immediately attract unwanted attention. Approaching the reception desk, Makoto requested permission to enter an F-rank dungeon. Before the process could be completed, the atmosphere throughout the building suddenly changed as people reacted to the arrival of an extraordinary figure. The newcomer was Yugo Agi, a legendary S-rank hunter. Holding a bottle of alcohol as casually as if it were morning coffee, he confidently declared that nothing started the day better than a drink. His carefree attitude left everyone around him speechless, while countless hunters hurried over in hopes of getting photographs and autographs from their famous idol. Although accustomed to the attention, Yugo's eyes unexpectedly settled on Makoto, who was standing at the counter. He approached him directly and asked for his name and hunter rank. Unsure why someone so famous was interested in him, Makoto introduced himself as Makoto Asuka, an F-rank hunter. Yugo acknowledged the introduction, but seemed unconvinced that Makoto truly belonged at the lowest rank. When Makoto asked if there was a reason for the conversation, Yugo simply replied that there was. Before leaving, he briefly apologized to the receptionist for interrupting her work, and casually left after making a playful remark that left her completely flustered. Watching him walk away, Makoto was left wondering why such an influential hunter had singled him out. The receptionist, still overwhelmed by the encounter, eventually regained her composure and completed Makoto's request, handing over the coordinates of the dungeon entrance. Thanking her, he departed with renewed determination, knowing this would be his very first solo dungeon run. Upon reaching the designated location, Makoto confirmed the coordinates one final time before stepping through the gate. The moment he entered, he sensed that something about the dungeon felt unusually oppressive. Riona questioned whether F-rank demons were truly considered the weakest, and Makoto confirmed that they normally were before asking if she had noticed anything unusual. Before either of them could investigate further, the sound of something massive rushing toward him echoed through the dungeon. Acting on instinct, Makoto activated his shadow weapon skill, creating a shadow sword just in time to intercept the incoming strike. Even so, the attack carried tremendous force, sending him flying backward. He managed to regain his footing without suffering serious injuries. Riona immediately checked on him, and Makoto assured her that he was unharmed despite the shock. Looking toward the creature that had attacked him, he quickly recognized it as a chaos wolf. The realization froze him in place, because the monster should never have appeared inside an F-rank dungeon. Riona observed the beast carefully, before concluding that it was far stronger than any low-tier demon. The discovery convinced both of them that something was seriously wrong with the dungeon. Makoto could only wonder whether he had somehow wandered into a D-rank dungeon by mistake. A pack of chaos wolves quickly surrounded Makoto, cutting off every possible escape. A quick glance behind him confirmed that the dungeon gate had already sealed shut, leaving no route back. Riona acknowledged the seriousness of their predicament, and Makoto admitted that taking on the entire pack at once would be extremely difficult with his current strength. Determined to fight, he extended the reach of his shadow sword and asked Riona to return to the sacred stone so she would not be caught in the battle. Pushing aside every distracting thought, he resolved to analyze the dungeon's mystery later. His immediate priority was reducing the wolves' numbers. Makoto rushed toward a single target, intending to eliminate it before the others could react. Before his attack connected, however, another wolf lunged from behind. He narrowly avoided it by stepping aside, only for a third wolf to slash at him from another angle. Tilting his body forward at the last moment, he escaped the strike and sprinted away before skidding to a halt. When he looked around, the wolves had once again formed a perfect circle around him. Their movements were synchronized with remarkable precision, making it nearly impossible to find an opening. As he searched for a weakness, one wolf charged with its jaws wide open. Makoto raised his sword to defend himself, but another wolf slammed into him from the side, throwing him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. While lying there, he realized the wolves were not attacking randomly. They waited patiently for even the smallest opening before striking together with flawless coordination. Facing such teamwork, he began questioning whether defeating them was even possible. Inside the sacred stone, Riona carefully observed the battle while considering a possible solution. She encouraged Makoto to study the wolves' movements closely, believing their coordination might reveal an opportunity. As the predators slowly closed in, a dangerous plan formed in his mind. Although he understood the risk, he decided it was worth attempting. Makoto deliberately dismissed his shadow weapon and lowered his guard, intentionally creating what appeared to be a fatal opening. Riona immediately realized how dangerous his gamble was, knowing that failure would almost certainly cost him his life. Taking the bait, every wolf rushed toward him at the same instant. Just before they reached him, Makoto instantly recreated his shadow sword. The weapon extended directly into the open mouth of the leading wolf, and with one powerful swing, he sliced through it while the momentum of the strike continued into the wolves behind it. 3 chaos wolves fell in a single attack. Staring at his weapon in disbelief, Makoto felt immense relief that his timing had been perfect. Riona emerged from the sacred stone and praised his strategy, recognizing that he had intentionally exposed himself to lure the entire pack into a single decisive strike. After collapsing to the ground from the tension of the battle, Makoto admitted he had not been certain the plan would succeed. Their attention then returned to the dungeon itself. Riona questioned why the monsters were far stronger than anything expected inside an F-rank dungeon. Makoto reached the same conclusion, believing the dungeon had to be at least D-rank. Such a challenge greatly exceeded his current abilities, but now that he had entered, retreat was no longer possible. Riona reminded him that the only way to escape was by defeating the dungeon boss, and Makoto accepted that there was no alternative but to continue forward. Before they could move deeper, both of them suddenly sensed another presence approaching. Moments later, an entirely new pack of chaos wolves emerged. Frustration washed over Makoto, as he realized that despite defeating several wolves, another group had already appeared. Riona returned to the sacred stone, but assured him that the situation had changed. Curious about her confidence, Makoto listened as she instructed him to stretch out one hand, concentrate on shadow chains, and target a single wolf. Following her guidance, he focused his magic, causing dark chains to burst from his hand and wrap tightly around one of the wolves. Riona explained that the technique was called Shadow Bind, an ability capable of restraining enemies. Excited to discover a new power, Makoto pulled the chained wolf toward him and cut it in half with a single swing. He barely had time to appreciate the skill before another wolf attacked from behind. Reacting immediately, he activated Shadow Bind again, trapping the creature before grabbing the chains with both hands. Instead of pulling it toward himself, he swung the restrained wolf through the air, smashing it into the surrounding pack. Realizing just how versatile the technique could be, Makoto combined Shadow Bind with his shadow sword, effortlessly controlling and defeating the wolves, one after another. Amazed by how naturally the ability responded to him, he praised its effectiveness. Riona acknowledged his talent, but warned that Shadow Bind consumed a considerable amount of magical energy, advising him not to rely on it recklessly. Makoto accepted the warning while expressing confidence that the new ability would allow him to keep advancing. Sometime later, after the last wolf had fallen, he planted his shadow sword into the ground and finally relaxed. Looking over the battlefield, he reflected on the large number of demons he had defeated and was surprised to realize he felt almost no exhaustion. Riona explained that hunters gradually grew stronger by defeating demons, and his increasing stamina was proof that he was steadily developing. Looking down at his own hands, Makoto felt a growing sense of accomplishment as he recognized how much stronger he had become in such a short time. After taking a brief rest, he signaled that it was time to continue. As they traveled deeper into the dungeon, Riona quietly reflected on his astonishing progress. Although he had very little experience fighting demons, his physical ability, composure, and quick judgment had allowed him to adapt at an incredible pace. Watching his rapid growth filled her with anticipation for what his future might hold. Eventually, Makoto reached the deepest chamber of the dungeon, where an enormous gate stood before him. He paused for a moment, instinctively sensing the danger waiting beyond it. Riona appeared beside him after noticing his hesitation. Makoto explained that clearing dungeons was the responsibility of hunters, and only a hunter could open the door leading to the boss. Although he admitted he was frightened by the thought of facing a D-rank monster, he also felt excited because this was his chance to prove that he truly deserved to call himself a hunter. Riona reminded him that his journey had only just begun. Inspired by her words, Makoto renewed his determination. He resolved to survive the battle, continue growing stronger, and one day become a hunter capable of protecting the world. Without allowing fear to stop him any longer, Makoto gripped the massive gate and pushed it open. After stepping inside, the entrance closed behind him, sealing the chamber. Raising his eyes, he came face to face with the dungeon's ruler, a gigantic hell scorpion. Its enormous body towered over him as its massive stinger rose high above its back, ready to strike while the fearsome beast roared in fury. At the arrival of its challenger,